Rush were a Canadian hard rock, prog rock band who existed from 1968 to 2018. So I wonder when they first started if they ever imagined they'd be rocking for 50 years. For much of their existence, they were a threesome. Geddy Lee on bass and vocals, Alex Lifeson on guitar, and Neil Peart, don't know how you pronounce that, on drums. They also all contributed synth work on their albums. The defining features were combining heavy rock verging on the heavy metal of the time, of the style of, say, Led Zeppelin and others, with more progressive elements. So long songs, complex structures, complicated rhythms, and then content that was related to sci-fi and fantasy stuff. They produced 19 studio albums in total. Hi, my name's Dan. So this was Rush's 7th album, and this was 1980. So around this time, what was happening in British prog rock was that they were having a big crisis. Punk had come along and blown them out of the water, and most of the prog bands that had been in the 70s in Britain were thinking about reinventing themselves. Some of them managed to do that successfully and survived, and some of them didn't, and basically didn't survive very well. Rush, I don't know if it was because they were Canadian, actually, although they started to do shorter, more accessible songs, still hung on to quite a bit of the progressive side of things, and that includes on this album. But having shorter and more accessible songs than some previous albums, this album sold really well. Okay, now I know this album pretty well. I'm quite a big fan of Rush. I've had a vinyl copy of this from probably only a few years after it came out. It might have been my first Rush album even. And a few years ago, by a few I mean kind of 3-4 years ago, I reviewed this album for a book that I wrote on prog rock. Right, don't get too excited. I say I wrote a book. I didn't say I published a book, okay? So, the first track, Spirit of Radio, is probably Rush's best-known hit. The other tracks are mixed in their accessibility. I particularly like Free Will, which is the second track on the album. The music's rocky, so it's dominated by this trio, what's known as a power trio, the bass, drums, and electric guitar. They've got occasional synth in there, which is usually pads. The bass is quite distinct and crunchy, and the guitar's overdriven, the drums are rocky, but everything's quite complex generally. There are some kind of nice grooves that you can get into, but it's complicated stuff. The music uses recognizable chords. The chord sequences can be quite unusual at times. There's a lot of rhythmic variation, particularly some odd bar lengths, odd rhythms, some switching of bar lengths. So it's basically rocky guitar-driven prog with some other variations and other instruments in there as well. One of the things that I really like about Rush, and it's true on this album, is they're tight. And they sound really good as a trio, and partly that's they're actually playing very closely in time with each other, but partly it's the way they can play together and complement each other, like the way that jazz players do when they're improvising. But this is all obviously kind of scripted, but they understand the effect what they're doing has on the overall sound really well, so you get a really tight, strong sound. I love it. Geddy Lee, so he's the vocalist as well as the bassist. He sings very high. He's well known for it. He's quite expressive and distinctive. The lyrics are varied. There's some fantasy stuff here. There's some more down-to-earth stuff. I mentioned the song Free Will, which is about religion and religious convictions, which is interesting. They're kind of philosophical at times. And Spirit of Radio is about the nature of commercial radio, as you might imagine. So I think this is a strong album. I think it bridges the gap between 70s prog and stadium rock. It's kind of a blend between those two things. It's rocky, it's almost metal at times. I really enjoy it. As I say, I've known it for years. Particularly love the first two tracks. So that's my take. What's yours? I'd love to know what you think. Please let me know in the comments. And that's it from me for now.
You can choose a ready guy.